There are over 36 million people who live in Canada. It is an incredibly diverse place. And as I watch them going about their lives, I can't help but think that I know something that most of them do not. And that is that 1 in 2 of these people will be touched by heart failure. Here in Toronto, at the Munk Cardiac Centre, we have over 1,000 staff. We follow over 163,000 patients. We do more than 10,000 procedures. And my colleagues and I follow more than 6,000 patients at the Ted Rogers Centre for Heart Function. He didn't believe in the word failure because that was not an option. And we see hundreds of new patients every year. And I'd like to stand here and tell you that we are unique, that this is a problem that is isolated in Toronto, that this high prevalence is a Toronto problem, but we know that it is not. Everywhere across our country, in the large cities and in the small remote communities in the north, the number of Canadians with heart failure continues to rise. Heart failure is an epidemic. And while many of you are quite familiar with this devastating disease, I think it's always important to put things into context. Medically speaking, heart failure happens when the heart is unable to pump adequately to meet the needs of your body. It is a complex and chronic condition. It is the end stage of many different cardiovascular diseases: hypertension, diabetes, coronary disease, valvular disease, and others. But importantly, to a heart failure patient, this is a crippling disease. It has a devastating impact on quality of life. It brings you to hospital frequently. It takes you away from your loved ones. It takes you away from work. It brings progressive disability. And it makes you feel lifeless as a patient. Everything requires effort. It is also a deadly disease with an average life expectancy of 2.1 years after the diagnosis. Well, what about the impact of heart failure in Canada? We know that there are about 50,000 new cases diagnosed each year in Canada, and it is therefore the most rapidly rising cardiovascular disease. There are about 100,000 hospitalizations that occur every year. There are 1 million Canadians who have heart failure. And I think one of the other incredibly impactful statistics is that the cost that we spend on heart failure is $3 billion a year. And if we look forward in this epidemic and think about, for example, what's happening in the US, we can expect by 2030 a 25% increase in the prevalence of heart failure. And if we look at the cost impact and cost implications of that, about a 215% increase in cost. So in Canada, the cost is going to rise from 3 to about 7 billion, and in the US, it is going to come close to $80 billion. And that's just heart failure. If we think more broadly about all forms of cardiovascular disease and look at the World Health Organization statistics, about 18 million deaths each year are from cardiovascular disease. It is the #1 cause of death. We also know that with urbanization and changes in air quality, that cardiovascular disease is increasing. And as goes cardiovascular disease, so goes heart failure, because it is often the final pathway. And we know with heart failure, there is no cure. So why is heart failure important to me? It's important to me because I'm faced with this reality every single day in clinic. Somebody comes in to see me and I have to tell them that they have heart failure. And often they will say, well, at least I don't have cancer. And I have to say, well, in actual fact, the prognosis with heart failure is actually worse than with many cancers. And then I have to go on and say that there really isn't a cure for heart failure. This is a chronic condition. And some cases, the treatment options can be quite limited. And even scarier is that by the time you come to see me in clinic or you're admitted to hospital, there's often less that we can do because the horse is out of the barn. If we look at our current model of care for heart failure, it's based on specialists, largely based on in-hospital treatments, expensive technologies, and even more so, we can think of some of the therapies that we use that are only available for a small number of people. So for example, we do about 400 heart transplants or mechanical hearts in the country. And yet, I told you that there are about 1 million Canadians with heart failure. When we consider the rate at which heart failure is growing, this is only going to increase this incredible gap that we have between those who receive the treatments, such as a transplant, and those who will benefit. We just do not have enough professionals, beds in the hospital, or dollars in the current system to continue in a business-as-usual model. And I think one of the most devastating parts of that is that there has often been a lifetime of missed opportunity by the time somebody comes to see us. We must focus on prevention. We must move to early treatment to prevent the development of advanced heart failure. So how do we do that? How do we prevent heart failure? How do we prevent deadly heart attacks that lead to heart failure? How do we reduce hospitalization and improve quality of life for a greater number of people for the same or maybe even less amounts of money? Well, I think we have to take our inspiration from another source. So if we look at the Toronto Stock Exchange, teams of people are deploying data mining technologies for stock forecasting. They're already using artificial neural networks. Financial analysts predict the up, the downs, the thises and that's of what the market is going to do. They're looking at Google activity, they're looking at postings on the stock market boards, and they're making these predictions well in advance of when they happen. And they have been doing that for years. Whereas in healthcare, as Tyrone was telling you, data entry is often still done manually. One of our leading data scientists looked at a data chart from the 1800s and a data chart from clinic, and they look exactly the same with these handwritten notes. When data is there, it's often housed in separate databases. Huge data may be generated, but only small pieces or summary data actually looked at. And the information doesn't interact because it's often not in the same language. So it becomes very hard to make meaningful connections. And yet every single time you touch the healthcare system, you leave an indelible mark. You leave a trail of data. Data that has been collected about you and your health all along the way. At PMCC, we're going to lead the digital revolution on healthcare. We're going to use this data to transform care. We are bringing the data together into a vast repository, a data lake, if you will. We are merging more than 40 disparate, individual, desolate databases into one place, written in a language so that it's actually able to interact. And critically, we're not making any assumptions. So we're not saying what data we think is important. We actually want it all. Anybody who knows me knows that that's the way I feel. We want the terabytes of data that's there, every conceivable lab value, ECG, X-ray, echo, where you live, what the weather is like, what is the air quality. We want all of it. And while we're doing that, we are also building one of the largest and richest repositories of genetic information, your genetic code, your entire genome, your DNA, what makes you, you. And with this whole new galaxy of data collected and curated and discovered, we are going to use today's most sophisticated tools to unlock the secrets of heart disease. We're going to use tactics to analyze this incredibly complex and detailed data to answer questions in an agnostic and unbiased way, which is something that traditional research often doesn't do because people come into the research with inherent biases about what may or may not be important. Our team of scientists, in partnership with the Vector Institute, will use artificial intelligence and machine learning to find associations and linkages that the human brain can't see, predict, or unravel. And to handle this data of this size and complexity, we need huge compute power, analyzing terabytes of data. In the 1960s, it took a whole room of computers to put somebody on the moon. Today, you have even greater computational power in your pocket, in your smartphone. We're going to unlock the potential of this amazing growth using computers to sift through your health data like never before. All of this, more data, sophisticated data analytics, new health technologies will allow us to think differently, to understand you and your health in a way that hasn't been possible before, to ask questions and solve some of these problems that have remained a mystery for decades. Researchers who are going to help unlock this power, this incredible resource are actually amongst you in the audience, and I'm going to call them out. And they are ready to move forward with your data and ask questions that will change your health and your life. Doug Lee.
I'm a cardiologist with a keen interest in making predictions about health outcomes. So for example, if we have an individual who is before us, can we use all of the vast amounts of data that are available to us to make predictions about what's going to happen to that patient, and then to make the best healthcare decisions? So for example, if you were a 58-year-old woman who presents to the emergency department with heart failure-like symptoms, and you have you have a clean medical history and no family history of cardiovascular disease, when is it appropriate to discharge you from the emergency department? Alternatively, if you're a 72-year-old man with a family history of cardiac disease with the same symptoms, should we make the same decision? Being able to make better predictions will lead to better healthcare for individuals and also lead to potentially huge cost savings for the healthcare system.
Phyllis Bilia.
I'm a cardiologist and a basic scientist. And while I see many patients like Heather in the heart function clinic with heart failure, I only understand that clinical side of it, but that's not the full story. To really understand what's going on at the molecular level, we need all of this data, we need the genetics, we need to have a better understanding of each individual that we see. And having this data infrastructure will allow us to do that. It'll allow us to really delve into developing a personalized medicine treatment plan so that every individual, based on not only their clinical symptoms, but the molecular underpinnings of who you are as a person, will be very helpful in developing a personalized treatment plan.
Dinesh Thavidarathnathan.
Thank you. I'm one of the cardiologists at the Munk Cardiac Centre, and I run the cardio-oncology program. And for me, perhaps one of the most devastating realizations in my patients is a treatment of one disease like cancer or diabetes results in life-threatening cardiovascular complications. So I would love to use this data to identify which patients are at an increased risk of cardiovascular complications, how best to treat it, and perhaps most importantly, how best to prevent it.
Slava Eppelman.
So like Dr. Bilia, I'm a cardiologist and I run a basic science research lab. And what we study is how immune cells can help the heart regrow after injury. What we've noticed is that within the heart, there's not just one immune cell, but there's thousands of immune cells. And these thousands of cells do thousands of different things. The only way we can really understand this and conceptualize what's happening in a patient's heart is through approaches like Dr. Ross is describing, computer-based approaches, artificial intelligence. And only in that way can we make progress. So thank you.
One of the most powerful ways that you've heard that we're going to use this data is for prediction. Predict your risk of a deadly rhythm, your risk of a heart attack, your risk of developing heart failure. By predicting your risk, we can intervene sooner, before the event actually happens. These predictive algorithms are going to become more and more refined as we put more data into them, effectively like a learning system. And we're going to put these tools in the palm of your hand, with tools like Medley, a remote patient monitoring application on your mobile phone. We can get the care to you before you actually need to come to hospital and be hospitalized, before you become critically ill. It can act as a safety net for you in between when you see the doctor during those long stretches when you're at home. PMCC is building and actively using computer algorithms to have an immediate impact on the care that we provide. So imagine a world in the not too distant future where your data, including biometric data and wearable data, is collected in real time, your risk is predicted in real time, and critically, the feedback or action loop on that data happens in real time, with your team able to intercede when needed and tell you when you are safe and not, when your risk is high or low, and when you're actually good to go home. As Doug said, this will dramatically improve the efficiencies of hospitals, increasing our capacity and improving the use of resources, and critically ensuring that we treat the right patient at the right time in the right way. And we will collect more data. We're not stopping there. Wearables and health-related data, apps and technologies, how active you are, your biometrics, and this will allow us to predict your specific individual risk and tell you what you can do to mitigate or eliminate it. And I would ask you, how would you change your life if you really knew your risk? That is the power of prevention. This is about wellness. We started from a place of heart failure, but this is about wellness and keeping the population healthy and free of cardiovascular disease. This is the digital future at PMCC, and the future is now. Thank you.